Next, we'll be moving on to Dr. Sariya, who's an assistant professor at Coventry University. And she would like to speak a little bit longer about her fostering, etc. And she also will be speaking about religion, interreligious relations, and British Islam.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala Rasul Kareem. Wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum, my dear sisters. It's a hard act to follow all the amazing talks we've heard all morning. It's been, food for the soul. So it's a hard act to follow. But let's see what I can do. And bear with me. So I thought I'd talk about intellectual leadership. So you've had political leadership. You've had leadership from activists. Now I am an intellectual leader. That's what some people categorize me to be, a leader of quote-unquote British Muslim studies in this country, a thought leader, a scholarly leader. Now, I do not necessarily subscribe to any of those labels, but let's pretend that I am for the next 20-odd minutes. Because I'm other things. I'm a revert to Islam. I'm a mum to 2 tiny terrors. I'm very many things. But for the next 20 minutes, we'll pretend that I am this quote-unquote intellectual leader of some sort. It's a hard one. What does it mean to be an intellectual leader? What does it mean to be a scholar, to be wise, to hold all this knowledge? And to me, knowledge is pointless if it does not make an impact on the communities within which it exists. Knowledge is meant to serve. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my own journey into this position of knowledge. Now, a few years ago, 10-odd years ago, I came to this country, blinking in the sunlight from India. I was a newish Muslim, not very new, but newish. But I had one, and I for very long, I'd worked in the investment banking sector. September 11 happened. I was the little hijabi in this very corporate environment. I became the fount of all knowledge. If people had questions about Islam and terrorism, yes, go to Sariya. She knows the answers. Sariya liked the attention. Sariya loved the flattery. Ooh, I know all these answers. And Sariya started answering those answers and then decided, you know what, let's do that full time. Let's become somebody who answers questions about Islam and Muslims. And so one fine day, I quit my job in investment banking, which was quite scary to everybody. But my mother said, I knew you were the mad child in the house. Go, you'll be successful. And mom was right. One thing led to another. Ended up doing a PhD. The very first book I published all those years ago was around Muslim women in Britain, demystifying the Muslimah. Now, all this afternoon, we heard some really scary stories about Prevent, about violent radicalization, about a really horrible government. And I know we've got a man with a horrible haircut as our prime minister. We do. I won't even say his name. But we do have him as our prime minister, but it's not all dark and gory and sadness. And while I was listening to those really important talks about Prevent, like Sister Ragad, I felt we need a more optimistic narrative. We need a narrative that, yes, talks about Prevent and the scrutinization, but we also need to talk about our young people across the country who are challenging it in different ways. We need to talk about our academics in the room who are challenging Prevent through their academic work. We need to talk about the communities that come together, about Barry and your neighbors who gave you a card. We need to talk about the positive stories around us. And in terms of our children, well, give them a chip on their shoulder. Make them know that their faith gives them a set of ethics that nobody else has, but a set of ethics that they share with communities around them. My friend who's a single mother, living on a council estate. My best friend, actually, who's nothing like me. We both love our children equally. We both strive to give our children the best that we can. And there is something around shared humanity that we need to talk about. Now, none of this was in the presentation that I was going to share with you. So let's move on quickly to the presentation. Now, I've done a lot of work over the last few years around feminism. Scary story, I am a feminist. Okay, so I do work around Islamic feminism, Islam and women's rights, interreligious dialogue, equality and human rights. But I want to talk to you about one piece of work, a piece of work that I recently completed. So I'm going to take you back in time now. We're going to leave the 21st century. We're going to go into the 1890s. 1889, the first 2 mosques that were established in Britain. So I'm going to take you. So everybody close your eyes, open them. You're in a different world. Poof. Anyway, so 1889, 2 mosques were established in Britain. These were the very first mosques. One in Woking, one in Liverpool, right? Very different. The Muslim community then was very different. This was before Britain knew Islam. So there were a few people who'd accepted Islam, come to Islam, white people who established these mosques. There were also travelers, people from the Indian subcontinent, from the Middle East, who came and who were transient, who'd come to England to study or who'd come to England on trade or on ships. So they came here as transient communities. They attended these mosques as well. Now, I want to tell you a few stories about these mosques, but not about the men in these mosques. I want to talk to you about the women. Now, a few years into my career, I noticed that young British Muslims were very interested in the history of these mosques, because these mosques predated, the waves of Muslims who came here in the 60s and the 70s, our grandparents. This was a very different kind of British Islam, and our young people wanted to know more about them. So a lot was being uncovered. A lot was being published. Nothing was being said about the women in these mosques. So Sariya said, let's do a difference. Now, I've got photos to show you. This is the inside of the Liverpool mosques. The man in the turban in the front is Sheikhul Islam of the British Isles, appointed by the Ottoman Khalifa, a Sheikhul Islam of the British Isles. The first and only time we've had a Sheikhul Islam of the British Isles. Abdullah Quilliam leading the mosque. Let me have the next photo. This is an image of a journal, a newsletter that was published every week from that mosque. And that has a record of life, as we see it, as it occurred in that community. This is a picture of the mosque in Woking. Very beautiful, very pretty, still in use, and you should go and visit. And this is an image of a publication that came out of that mosque, right? These were the kind of things that I looked at. And I'm still not telling you the bombshell that I discovered, because I did discover 2 bombshells. So what kinds of stuff did I look at? In these magazines that I showed you, there were narratives of people, including men and women, who said, oh, we've converted to Islam. There were little lists of people who'd said, oh, so many people converted to Islam. Here you can see Amy Norton, Clara Ellery, Annie Blackman, William Maxwell, and Michael Thomas, all converted to Islam, 1896 onwards. 3 women, 2 men. We are still not talking about the women. Other stuff, from those magazines, highlighting women's roles in society. Poetry written by women. Poetry criticizing women. This is about the new woman who blah-de-blah cannot, because you must remember, back then, yes, there were Muslim sort of patriarchies and Muslims saying, oh, women should not do this. Some Muslims of the time. There were also Victorian and Georgian patriarchies. Oh, if women think too much, they'll grow mustaches. That was in a book. And so there was jokes about what women cannot do. This is a prayer from 1914, 1916 time. You can see women at the back. And this is another picture of a magazine. I just thought, why were they talking about bikes? Well, anyway, they liked talking about bikes. The women in these communities. Now, this is where the bombshell happens. What I discovered threw me completely. The Woking Mosque, we would not have had that first mosque in Woking if it wasn't for a woman. Begum Shah Jahan of Bhopal of India funded the first purpose-built mosque in Britain. She came here on stately visits. No place to pray, let's build a mosque. Begum Shah Jahan was an amazing person. She educated women and ran schools and madrasas in India. She built our first mosque. Go to the mosque pages today. It's on page 4. Nobody's even bothered that a woman did this. And this is a poetry from somebody called Fatima Elizabeth Cates, another revert to Islam. Amazing personality. Now she's writing, she's paying homage to the Begum of Bhopal in this poetry. And she says, how can the feeble pen express, how can the poet praise the noble acts of righteousness, the virtuous deeds and waves? Thou ruler of this happy state, thou noble Shah Jahan fair, how can this humble bard relate thy virtues bright and rare? Now I'm going to stop there because the poetry is beautiful, but you know, Fatima Elizabeth Cates is calling herself humble, okay? The humble poet, the humble bard. She doesn't tell us about herself. The second mosque, so the Liverpool Mosque, second bombshell. Everybody talks about it as the Quilliam Mosque. Sheikhul Islam of the British Isles, Abdullah Quilliam, built it. Yes, he built it. 3 people, though, founded it. Him, another man, we shall leave him unnamed just to, restore balance, Fatima Elizabeth Cates. Now, what this history tells us is women are at the very center, and this makes me all emotional, very center of Islamic history in Britain. We need to talk more about these people. We need to talk more about ourselves. I kept finding all these amazing women as I looked through the archives. Mrs. Nafisa Keep, very controversial, American woman, fought with the American Muslims, came here delivering brilliant talks about the rights and the role of women in Islam, representing this nascent Muslim community to wide fora. Has anybody in this room heard about Nafisa Keep? I'll shoot myself down in flames if somebody has. Moving on, please. She's written this amazing thing, The Position of Women Under Islamic Law, a lesson to be learned for all of us actually from it. Lots of other significant women, they came to me in droves. Hanifa Jones, she was somebody whose story I forget now, mother of the Sheikh. Lady Rosa Warren, the first ever debater. Madame Therese Weil, who acted as a news journalist, who sort of bought a political analyst. We are talking about 1897 there. A female Muslim political analyst, 1897. We have them. Now, moving on quickly then. They established a home for children. So in Liverpool, there were lots of children back then, illegitimate. Fathers ran away. They said, we need to give their mothers a second chance at life, and we'll do so by looking after their children and other poverty-stricken children. The women ran this with the support of the men in their community. Now, Sister here spoke to us about partnerships between men and women. More of those. Lady Evelyn Cobbold, very aristocratic. Her mother was lady in waiting to the Queen. Now, has anybody heard about Lady Evelyn Cobbold? At least one person, please. Brilliant, you have. I am not shooting myself in flames. I have been and met her great-grandson as well and been up there. Now, Lady Evelyn Cobbold was somebody, she grew up in Egypt because her father worked with the Foreign Office. And she says, I don't know when I became Muslim. I was always Muslim, I think. And she goes to meet the Pope, and the Pope says, bow down. She says, no, I'm Muslim. And that's when she sort of publicly came out. What makes her really, really cool is possibly the first ever British woman to perform the Hajj, most certainly the first ever British woman to perform the Hajj in a motor car. So she goes there on a ship, hires a car, performs the Hajj, then writes a book about it. The book becomes a bestseller. So she's actually really famous. She's been quite, carefully, publicly portrayed more recently in a British Museum exhibition on the Hajj. And two people in a room know about her work. Moving on, please. That's a photo of her in all her lovely fine glory. This is a really beautiful photo. I went to see her great-great-great-grandson, and he showed me the first ever copy of her book. On the top of the book, she's named as Lady Evelyn Cobbold. Open the book, open the dust cover, and you see there engraved in gold on the book, Hajja Zainab. That was the Muslim name she chose. Lots of pictures of her. When she went on Hajj, they made her wear the niqab. The poor thing, otherwise she always wore Mayfair fashion. Moving on. And that's her grave up in the hills of Scotland, very difficult to get to. You need a 4x4. Now, I've got a few concluding reflections, and I think I've got decent time to do them. Now, the first question I want to talk about is, how do we do history? We talk about history as fact, don't we? This history that I uncovered, so many scholars before me have looked at those same archives. It took a woman, a Muslim woman, to look at those archives and say, hey, there were some really cool women in there. Doing this history, I had all these bombshell moments. Founders of the mosques were women. Women were at the center of history. These women, when you look at some of the women, there are stories of them, particularly, now these women I spoke to were quite privileged. But if you look at women in some of the port communities, there were poorer women. There were working class white women who married Yemeni sailors and, Bangladeshi sailors. These women were like, I don't like to use the word, but they were treated basically like the dregs of society. The dirty people, their children were the half-bloods. But these children, when they speak about wanting to know about Islam, they say, we did not convert to Islam because we married Muslim men. But when we observed Muslim men and saw some of their behaviors, we went to the Sheikh Al-Hakimi and said, get us a teacher. We want to learn, and after we learn, we will decide. And I was taken up also by, the academic term is intersectionality, but it came up today. As women, we are impacted by our faith, we are impacted by our color, by our social class, by all sorts of things. Yes, we face the most Islamophobic attacks. But yes, we are also holders of power because we can, with agency, toss the attackers, give the attackers a smile, bring them into your home. And maybe they'll love you. Well, I don't know, don't do that. Health and safety first. Moving on, please. The British Islam that I spoke to you about previously, it was very, very different. That's a typical British Muslim family. No hijabs, not like the Muslims we see today. They had lives that were very different from ours. They came from a social class that was very different. Here's Lady Evelyn Cobbold hunting. She's hunted 2 deers. Those are not the kind of things we do today. So I don't think we can lock, stock, and barrel learn from them. That was never my intention with doing this talk. But what I wanted to do today is to show you that what I wanted to do today was to tell you that, look, if you move away, if you look at our context, yes, there are issues. Lady Fatima Cates, she had stones thrown on her. There are occasions when, she's come to the mosque with her head bleeding. There was Islamophobia then, but very different. There were, people thought anybody who was a Muslim was either a foreigner or was mad, mentally unstable, apparently. Yet these people thrived. Yet these people continued to be Muslim. And there are some amazing stories around how, visiting dignitaries from across the empire would come and see the Queen and would then come to Liverpool to meet the Sheikh al-Islam of the British Isles. Now, the stories from those communities have dried up. And there is sadness and there is loss related to those communities because we don't really know much about them, what happened to their generations. But nevertheless, they remain inspirational. And coming back to my point around intellectual scholarship, I am still so I'm a sociologist of religion. And I do a lot of work around British Muslim studies. I do a lot of work around interreligious relations, discrimination, and equality. I also have started to do a lot of work around women's religion in India. I am not a historian, but my positionality as somebody who's a convert to Islam, somebody who is who understands faith, somebody who lives feminine forms of Islam, meant that I could look at these archives that everybody else has been looking at and come up with new knowledge. I am still, unfortunately, often the only brown woman in a room full of intellectuals. That needs to change. And, speaking about, reflecting briefly on parenthood, that we had the last session, encourage your children to get into the humanities. We've got loads of Muslim doctors, engineers, managers. Please, we need Muslim scholars who can work both within religious frameworks and secular, modern, secular frameworks within the sociology of religion and history. Because my work around adoption and fostering, for example, I've done work. There are 4,500 Muslim children in care, many of whom will need parents. I've done the research. I've worked with Muslim scholars to build guidance around adoption and fostering. I have taken that to the government, and the government has listened. I have taken that to social workers, and social workers have listened. And so the work we do can make a difference. I want to leave you with two thoughts. Now, that's the Taj Mahal. We all know about it. Now, if I were to tell you, name me the most significant woman in relation to the Taj Mahal. Come on, hands up. Who can tell me that? Right, you can all wash your mouths with soap. Go into the bathroom now. Can we have the next slide, please? Do you know who this woman is? And she is not Lady Mumtaz. Right. You might know this because I did a talk with you in the room once. But you've forgotten, fine, good. So this lady is Begum Jahanara. She was Shah Jahan's daughter. When Shah Jahan, she was a scholar, Sufi Muslim scholar. She has translated documents, complete, core Islamic texts, translated it and made it accessible. When her her father was busy crying and building the Taj Mahal, she was basically running the entire Mughal Empire. She was the Padshah Begum of the Mughal Empire. You remember Mumtaz Mahal, you don't remember the woman. So, in all these ways, we talk about female scholarship. A few fingers point back to us because we have not done our homework. Now, the last thought I want to leave you with is, 25 years ago, when I was a little Christian girl outside my, grandfather's church in Etumanur, Kerala, if somebody had to tell me, in 20 years, you're going to be a thought leader, an intellectual leader of British Muslim studies in the UK, on the other side of the world, I'd have probably thrown a stone at them. But I am here. If I could have achieved what I have achieved, I used to be a stammerer as well, quite badly. I don't think I've stammered very much today. If I could have achieved what I have achieved so far, anybody in this room can do that and more. So intellectual leadership, please. It's my hat today. It can be your hat tomorrow, and it can be the hat your children wear. So welcome to a world of agency, and welcome to a world that Allah has ordained for us. A world that is beautiful, a world that is not easy, but a world that nevertheless holds opportunity. Thank you very much to Strive UK for letting me come here, and Sister Lamia for dealing with all my eccentricities. Thank you to all of you for listening.
Thank you very much to Dr. Sariya. Next, I would like to invite Rimla Akhtar, who has been awarded an MBE in 2015 for her contribution to equality and diversity in sports.
Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Just waiting for some slides, but whilst I'm waiting for those, Just want to say what an act to follow. MashaAllah, very, very impressed by not just yourself, but all the speakers that I've heard from this afternoon that I've been here. And it's an absolute honor and privilege to be here to speak with you all. Thank you to Strive UK and Shona in particular, who's been liaising with me and dealing with me along the way and my kind of last minute plans. But also just to say, look, the topic is leadership and women's leadership, obviously Muslim women's leadership right now for this panel. I don't see myself as a leader. I think other people call me that, but I just don't think leadership is sought, and therefore I don't see myself in that light. All I see is my ability to lead myself first and foremost, and I think that every single person in this room can be a leader of themselves. So that's where I begin from. And I wanted to talk about aspirations and being the first because Alhamdulillah has put me in positions where I have been the first, but the idea for me is to make sure I'm not the last and make sure that there are many, many more coming with me right now and actually going past me, as well as in the future, inshallah. So I'm reminiscing of the story, my journey really, and really all I can speak to is my journey. That's all I can speak about, and hopefully inshallah within that there will be something that you can take away and go, that works for me, or that works for somebody that I know. So that's where I'm coming from with this. So I thought I'd just show you a little bit about the work that I do, and this is sort of the glamorous side of things, the sort of the facade, as you could call it, in terms of the work that I do in the sports industry. So, you know, it's great when you get to meet these amazingly talented athletes from our community, from the Muslim community. In particular, obviously I have an affinity towards Muslim athletes, particularly across the globe. But it really masks all the hard work that goes into getting into these positions. It's the hard work of my mother, who's here with me, and is an amazing talent in her own right, also an MBE. And works in the mental health arena and has taught me to constantly give back and serve the community and serve people. She's been in the mental health arena for over 30 years. So what more do I need in a role model? Exactly. So Allah's blessed me with that first and foremost, with my mother and the example that she's given me. Her leadership is all I have. Her leadership is all I have to base my leadership on, and trust me, she keeps pulling me back in when I need pulling back in as well. So, I'm very blessed in that sense. I'm very blessed to have two amazing older brothers who have supported me and been role models in my life as well. And we forget sometimes that the structure that comes around anyone's leadership in their life, their personal leadership, as well as if it's more within the community. So just to go into my story, that's me. What presentation wouldn't, I don't think a presentation's complete without an embarrassing baby photo. So this is me. I was born in the 80s in Edgware, North London, not far from here. And as I say, I have two older brothers, and my parents were born and raised in Pakistan. And then they came to London after getting married. So they were starting this new life together in this new city, and clearly far from the comforts, the serious comforts that they had in Pakistan. And my mother, in particular, had an extremely privileged life. So her father was this sort of national treasure. He was this, one of the country's finest and leading barristers, having previously served in the RAF. And then her mother was a dispensing chemist in her own right. And she also was a community leader. She was also the daughter of one of the highest ranking Pakistani government officials of his time, an ex-army man. So he'd served Britain prior to the occupation, prior to the end of the British occupation of India. And my mother still fondly recounts her sort of memories of her childhood growing up and running around in the fields of her grandfather's home in the country, or perhaps some of the cheekier moments where she'd lock her neighbours into their home and then get away with it because of whose daughter she was. So, all of those kind of moments that she used to have that she fondly recounts. And here, just the slide before, here is one of the moments for me, because she was sports president year after year at school, and used to win all these trophies. And I remember going back to Pakistan one time and going to my nanny's house and seeing all these trophies and saying, whose trophies are these? And they were all my mother's, which I brought back. I still haven't shined them yet, but I want to shine them and put them on display. But she, you know, had been through this really privileged life in Pakistan, come to the UK, and then suddenly everything changed, right? Because, you know, it's not just that you're dealing with, you know, now being married and sort of growing up in that sense as a woman, but also in terms of dealing with the racism and dealing with the fact that not just, no worries, a bit higher? Yeah. Okay. Not just that, you know, you're dealing with racism, but actually as a woman, there's a gendered element to racism. And so she dealt with a lot of that. And at the same time, you know, stepping up to the task of raising 3 children. And step up she did, and hopefully, inshallah, you know, what she's done is develop 3 individuals who will do her ancestors and her adopted country proud. And as I said earlier on, it's through her determination that I've been successful in what I have done. So coming back to my journey, you know, I excelled in my studies at school. I was fully focused, but my shyness meant that I didn't quite fit into the group. So for those of you that remember being at school, you know, it was, you'd have the sporty girls, you'd have the swotty girls who were really studious, you'd have the cool girls, you know, you'd have these little groups in the school that you're in. And I never quite fitted into any of those groups. I sort of floated around and wanted to sort of keep a little bit of distance. I didn't quite feel that I fitted in, because the school that I went to, I was the only Asian, well, I was one of about 3 Asians in the entire school, and I was definitely the only Muslim girl there, and certainly the first to ever wear a hijab at that school. And so it was a little bit of a struggle on that front, you know, identifying with those around me. I had to find my own identity, I think you could say. But there was one area that I did excel further, and that was the sports field. And as I say, my mom was sporty, her mother was sporty, she played basketball, I think, my mum's father was sporty, etc. So it was in the blood. I've got these 2 older brothers, so it was bound to happen that I'd get into sport. I'm the only girl, so, you know, they are my heroes, they were my heroes back then, so I did whatever they did. And if that meant that we were playing football, I played football. If that meant we were playing cricket in the back garden, we'd be playing cricket in the back garden. And I kind of just ran with it. So, you know, growing up in the 80s and the 90s, there's a lot of racism, a lot of discrimination around. I didn't quite know what people were saying. I didn't quite know what it meant, but I knew it wasn't nice, and I knew that I wasn't accepted. And then there's the sports field, where I seemed to be playing well. So I played, you know, all my school teams. I went to the regional level, I went to national level, international level in different sports, and I was excelling. And here was this space where nobody seemed to care about the color of my skin. Nobody seemed to care about the fact that I'm a girl. Nobody seemed to care about this piece of cloth that I wear around my head. All they cared about was my ability on the field of play. And then that meant that I could accept myself because I was accepted. So you can imagine that growing up for me, the sports field was really significant. And these 2 older brothers that I have, you know, outside of the sports field, they protected me as only older brothers can. And as I say, they're the reason that I got into sport in the first place. Being typical brothers, they did throw me into goal sometimes and then take shots at me. Very typical brothers, as you know, but maybe not so protective in that environment. But they've given me this really, it's a real connection to something that means more, and it's sports as a community. So it's specifically team sport. I've excelled in individual sports, badminton, tennis, etc. But team sports does something to a community. And so I wanted to do something that went beyond just myself and my abilities and succeeding and getting medals, etc. The truth is that for me, our faith, Allah, through our faith, our religion's basics, it lifts us above the average. And that's not coming from a place of arrogance. It lifts all humans above average, because it's that proverbial sort of robe of royalty that you wear when you enter a masjid, when you enter a mosque and you go to pray. You are like royalty because Allah has called you to the prayer. He has made sure that you're there and you're praying in front of him. However, whatever's going on, the fact that you're there, you've put on that robe of royalty, and therefore our religion, I do believe, raises us towards that divine light, and it raises us above average. And my job and your job is to remember that Allah raises us. He's the one that raises us. Now, if you think about it, anyone, you know, all those stars that were on the athletes that were on one of the first slides, you might need to get in a queue to get a picture with them. You might get in a queue to get an autograph with them. But when it comes to Allah, all you have to do is turn up. All you have to do is turn up early in a mosque, for example, to get into that front row, to be in front of him, and he's the one that raises us, nothing else that's going on around us in the world. So for me, that reflection was, what did I have to fear in my life? So I was going through all this stuff in terms of racism, discrimination, Islamophobia, etc. But what did I really have to fear in my life, right? I can do what I want to do if Allah allows me to do it. It's as simple as that. If he wants something good for me, and he always does, it's going to happen. So what do I have to fear in life? I just had to step up. I just had to get to the front of the line. And at the same time, maintain good intentions. I think that was the clear thing for me that I realized quite early on in this quote-unquote leadership journey, right? That the idea is to worship, the idea is to serve. At the same time, as I said at the start, I had to balance this desire to serve and worship with the knowledge that leadership is not sought in Islam. So you're not supposed to go after leadership and positions and these kind of things. And so what I had to do, and what I do now, is do what I feel is my duty, and I leave the rest to Allah. So for me, it isn't about the position. I used to work in the city, but I'm not career orientated. I'm just focused on what I would like to do and what I think will have a positive impact. But when you are put into those positions, it's about using the position to do good. So that's something that I've learned. Without good shepherds, the flock will suffer. It's as simple as that. So when you're in the position, you have to step up. And by leaving it, and by leaving it to Allah, I know that I'll only be placed in positions that are going to be good for me and good for the people around me. Very simple thing, very basic thing our religion teaches us, but so powerful. So from being this shy, introverted girl who would never stand in front of you right now like this when I was growing up, I've come out of my shell. I've learned to communicate as a player, as a captain, as a leader, whatever you want to call it. I am accepted, and in many ways, I've come full circle. So I've been through this entire journey to find myself, what I stand for, my purpose. But both my purpose and I were there all along. I had to discover it. I had to go through all those experiences, the beautiful and the ugly, in order for me to find out what that was. And finally, I've begun to accept myself. So whatever happens in life, all the discrimination that I've dealt with, I'm sure many of us around this, I'm pretty sure everyone in this room has dealt with, ultimately is about you finding your identity. In my experience, it has been about me finding my identity and being comfortable in that identity, being comfortable with my Muslimness, being comfortable with my Pakistani heritage, and being comfortable as a British person as well, and all of those aspects. So in a world that's constantly causing us and trying to create chaos, actually trying to cause us to doubt the things that are certain within us and about us, my aim is to support, and I particularly work with younger people, it's about supporting them as the future leaders and the current leaders, in fact, to find what is certain within themselves and not concern themselves with all the doubts that people try and create around them, that society tries to create around them. So as someone who was forced to question every aspect of her identity, am I Asian first, or am I British first, am I Muslim first, or am I British first, all of that kind of stuff. What I'm saying is that ultimately it's about you finding who you are and not caring so much about the labels that people wish to put on you. Who are you as an individual? As a Muslim woman, you are different to every single person in this room, right? And it's about you finding yourself throughout your journey and trying to learn what Allah's teaching you along the way. So I just want to finish. I have 3 thoughts. So I'm going to, reflections, if you will, from my journey that I'm going to finish with. that I've learnt and maybe are useful for you as well. So the first one is and one more, this one, yeah. So the first one is pay attention to your intention. Pay attention to your intention. And we have the saying in our faith that actions are judged by intentions. And I really do believe that this is something that every single person here can appreciate. So if your intentions are good, the actions and impact for me will likely be good, always. That's what I've seen in life. So that remember in every moment, in every aspect of this world, Allah's names are manifesting themselves in you. So, for example, and the Quran talks about it, signs within yourselves is what He will show us, right? So in every single moment, what name of Allah is manifesting itself in you? For example, Al-Wahhab, right? So in terms of when we're constantly gifted as to, I've been gifted in the work that I do in the sports industry, for example. So Al-Alim in terms of, understanding something right for the first time and all the knowledge that we get. As-Sami, when we ask Him for goodness in our lives, all of these things, what name of Allah is manifesting itself in you in every single moment? Think about that. And see what name of Himself He's revealing to you. We will show them our signs within themselves. And if your intentions are right, I believe that you'll see those signs. The next slide, that one, is pay it forward. So this is something that people say for a long time, and I think you should pay it forward from now. So recognize that each and every one of us has some kind of privilege in our lives, in some aspect of our life. And really just think about those that don't share that privilege. Now, those that don't share the privilege don't want any kind of pity, they don't want a pity party, but they want the opportunity to grow and to succeed and move on. And so, this life I've seen, whether it's in the city in terms of the corporate life that I've lived, or whether it's in the sports industry, actually, life teaches us to compete with one another. It teaches us to constantly compete, this rat race, right? We've seen it in the city a lot, and I have actually, alhamdulillah, I've left that life and Allah's shown me the light. And that constant, just constant competition, rat race, trying to get above each other to the top of the pyramid. And actually, life for me is about knowing and supporting one another. How you define your success will affect the quality of the life that you live very deeply. And so, coming back to the athletes, not these ones specifically, but many that I come across. They'll be successful in the eyes of others from the outside looking in, but actually they struggle to find contentment in their life. And so if your desire is to be successful in the eyes of other people and get to the top and don't care about what I do along the way, you will burn out. And that desire to be successful in the eyes of others will burn you out fully. And I've seen that in so many people. The desire burns out and you burn out as well. And if you link it to that first reflection, if you intend well, you find your cause that's ambitious for you, your immediate family, your community, the wider community, etc., however narrow or wide you want to go. Because as I said, leadership is about you first and foremost, because you're, ultimately, that's what you're responsible for. What did you do with what I gave you? That passionate desire to succeed for others and for the sake of Allah, that never dies. And then finally, be humble and compassionate. So there is too much leadership that I see, unfortunately, within the sports industry right now, which is professional and personal, actually. It involves way too much ego. And humility and compassion are two traits that are increasingly seen as a weakness. I think as women, maybe this is unfair to the men, but just standing here, I'm thinking we have, I think, a stronger connection to those two, humility and compassion, possibly than men, but I'm not sure if that's true. Sorry, it just came to my head, and maybe I shouldn't have said it. But if you think about it, coming back to the point, if you think about it, being humble and compassionate means letting go of control or the need to control, in fact, and it's about living a positive life in the moment. It takes courage and strength to be able to do that. if you go into positions of leadership, whether, like I say, whether it's as a mother, as the head of a family, or in other circumstances, the head of a family, or into the community, or into political leadership, or into anything else, whatever it is, captain of your sports team, if you play sports, remember your position is one of honor, one of privilege. So the ego has to be removed and give it the humility and the compassion that it deserves. If you ever met those athletes that I've met, the ones that are the best leaders for me are the ones with the greatest humility and compassion. And that's not just the Muslim athletes, I'm talking about everyone here. The ones with the biggest humility and compassion are the best leaders of their teams. And for me, the greatest lessons in humility and compassion and mercy for me, like I said right at the start, have come from my mother. And now my compassion, my humility, my mercy are all for her. And inshallah, you know, I mean, I obviously always fail on so many occasions, but that's all it's about. And we've been told by our Prophet ﷺ that every religion has an ethos, and the ethos of Islam is haya, humility, modesty. And the athletes and footballers that I respect the most are the ones that demonstrate this the most. Our faith, just coming to the end of what I wanted to say, our faith requires excellence from us. It requires ihsan in everything that we do. We should reach for the moon every single time, but sometimes you reach for the moon and you don't quite make it. The beautiful consolation of that, the beautiful consolation is that even if you don't make it to the moon, you'll end up amongst the stars. And that's something to remember. That's why we always have ihsan, that's why we always aim for excellence. And the reality isn't what we see in the virtual world, it isn't what we see on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is. The reality is our personal growth only happens in the real world, right? In our horizontal relationships with everyone around us, as well as our vertical relationship with our Lord. That's where real growth happens. And we should be content with knowing that our destiny is in Allah's hands. His are the best, the safest, and they'll always want what's for your best. And I've definitely seen that in my life, and I hope that you have too. And for those of you who ever doubt the impact that you can have, and I know that there might be some here, this is a quote that I always use when I'm speaking. You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop. Do all of this from my experience, and I can guarantee you'll never stop beaming with pride every single day when you see the impact of your work. Pride that Allah's chosen you for this very special work. And if anyone's story can teach you that this, it's mine. And I really believe that if anyone can achieve real success, it's you guys. So thank you once again for listening to my story very briefly. And it's just a privilege to be here, and I hope that you will continue to shine. I'm sure you already are, and inshallah you will continue to shine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Rimla, for sharing with us your story. Thank you to all the sisters who have shared their stories on this panel today. And now, because of the lack of time, we will only be taking 2 questions from the audience, if there are any. The audience are very tired, yes. There is a question, yes?
Oh gosh, we'll have to be here for the rest of the day, rest of the evening. Why did I become Muslim? Gosh, right. Do we have bed rolls and dinner? Okay, I'll give you the very short answer. My mother accepted Islam when I was 14, and I was the rebellious daughter of a Muslim mother and a Catholic father. I decided I'd become atheist, and I tried that, but I think I was too, as a good Catholic girl, I was too attached to the idea of an Abrahamic God. So after a lot of, and I refused to talk to my mother because I thought she'd done something really stupid. You know, she'd accepted this barbaric faith and then broken up the family as well because my poor father went away. So I refused to talk to her. She was brilliant. She took us to church. even when she was Muslim and we were Christian. She was brilliant. And then one day, finally, I asked her, Mom, why did you convert? And she said to me, darling, go and read the Bible page to page. So at the age of around 14, I read the Bible page to page, and at the end of it, I knew. But I said, no, I'm not going to become Muslim. So I started reading other stuff. I read a bit of Hindu spirituality. Ultimately, my mother actually, I read the Quran. But before the Quran, my mother had sent me Surah Al-Ikhlas in a letter. And that became like a rosary for me. I'd say it with my rosary. I'd say my Hail Marys, my Our Fathers, and then Surah Ikhlas. And one thing led to another. I read the Quran and converted 2 years after my mother converted. So mummies are inspirational. Thank you, mummies.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is to both Sister Ragad and Sister Nasreen, because you were speaking about organizations that help with leadership and help the young generation. So just briefly, could you touch upon what, if somebody here was inspired and wanted to become involved, what was the next step? The logistics of how they could start?
Yeah. If you're talking like logistically, like are you trying to ask about Strive or the organization? Okay, about UKIM. So do you want to know the entire structure or just about how to, yeah. We have got quite a number of local branches around, so if the sister lives quite close to any of the local branch, then she could get involved in the branch with activities from being a sympathizer and then becoming associate member. For that, we have a book that we all read, and that is Witness Unto Mankind. That is explaining, being a Muslim, what is your role and what is your responsibility. And once you understand that, then you are assigned different roles within the organization to see if what you believe, you can do it as well. And then from there, you come up to membership. So that's how we do it.
A very important question, because you gave us threads and then you're leaving, so how to follow. I think one of the main things that I've learned in working with organizations is for organizations to connect and to integrate, to complete each other's work rather than doing the exact same thing. So for example, I could give you an example. UKIM and MAB, UKIM Y, young youth, and MAB youth, yes, in the Middle West, in Birmingham, they collaborated on a project which is a podcast. And it talks about issues that are of importance to Muslim community. And I think that's an amazing thing to show our youngsters. It doesn't matter which organization you belong to, as long as the values fits within, as Sister here said, it fits within what you need yourself. I am, Sister Nasreen spoke about membership. Once you become, you want to do it. But the problem is youth never wants to become part of organization. Just give me an activity or a project. And that's why what we concentrate on are projects. So things that youth do want to work at. I admit that we're very bad in communicating to the members or to the society, the communities, what we do. So it's very hush-hush. So you've done, for example, a badge campaign, Believe and Do Good. How many of you know that these are campaigns collaborated between different organizations to work for the community, to feed the homeless, to work with the police, with the councils? Not many know that. So it's our problem in making our work known. And I think it's very important to visit centers, to communicate, to go on websites. I mean, you should be able, and still, if you go on the website, it's not as clear as it should be. And I think it's up to us organizations to make our work approachable and clear and communicate well. they say do 20% and tell people what you're doing, around 80%. So I think that is a question that brings to my mind that honestly we should make people aware of the opportunities that is there for them in the community.
Thank you very much, everyone. Now I would like to invite Sajina onto the stage, who's my mother, to present mementos from MMCWA on behalf of Strive. So the first memento goes to Sister Nazreen. The next memento will go to Dr. Sariya. The next memento will go to Raghad. And last but not least, it will be Dr. Rimla. Thank you very much to our panelists once again. Okay, thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum. As discussed earlier, Sister Arzu Mirali was unable to make it today, so she's been kind enough to send us a message. It's probably a snapshot of what she wanted to speak about today. So the topic was fighting the good fight, a life in defending human rights, and this is what she had to say. Dear friends, Assalamu alaikum. I'm sorry not to be able to attend today. I wanted to share a few thoughts. Most will be obvious to many of us here, but I think they are worth restating. Since the start of my work, and in particular when we started Islamic Human Rights Commission back in '97, it became glaringly clear to me that most of the work and campaigning was and has been undertaken by women. Indeed, IHRC, apart from a blip around 2010, has always been staffed by women in the main. This is work that is unglamorous and usually ill-paid, particularly when you work for NGOs that won't take any government funding. It is so utterly frustrating in this context to endlessly hear, especially from Muslim and community organizations, jumping on government bandwagons, talking about empowering Muslim women and women of color. We have many problems. Things are not brilliant, but we really do need to be saying that enough is enough. We need to be looking at how the communities we live in and have been empowered by our women and what wider society can learn from this, as well as how our communities can build on this. We are at a moment in time when the securitized state and the rise of nativism are impacting our daily lives in ever extreme measure. I think it passed a lot of us by while fighting for justice and equality and against racism and hatred, that the impact on the next generation has been more devastating, not least in the normalization of the structures we live in. As difficult as it is, we need to keep stating that a different world is needed, and it is indeed possible. We don't need to just participate more in structures that are inherently racist and sexist. We need to recognize, educate, and ultimately find alternatives to the mechanisms that do endless violence to us. My hope and prayers are with you all today to carry that challenge forward. Forgive me for anything that I have said out of turn. From Arzu. Thank you.
Thank you to all the sisters who have waited so patiently throughout the entire day. And due to the lack of time, we will be cutting short the vote of thanks. So I hereby say thank you to everybody who has taken part, all the young girls who have worked hard, and all the organizations who have helped out. I'd like to invite Teacher Rahmatun Nisa to do dua, and that will be the end of the conference. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I'm not sure how patient you are to yet listen to yet another talk. I don't think all of you have the patience anyway. Shall we call it a day? Can we call it a day? Yes. So I request all of you to please stand up and give a big round of applause for the organizers and also the speakers. Yes, for the organizers. For themselves. Sure. Okay, you had been wonderful audience today. And as some concluding remarks, I just want to tell you that we were attempting to discuss on different topics regarding me and myself, my world, our social life, Muslim lives in Britain, and even what is happening in India. We were talking sometimes regarding the Shaheen Baghs, and political women leadership, Muslim leadership, and a lot of topics we have been talking. But as you know, within one day, all of them were, they had a lot of experiences to share, but they were done injustice. And none of them were given enough time. And this is what happens in a conference like this. But they were just triggers for each one of us to think about and put it into practice and develop on it. We need to think regarding the ideas that are shared with us, and we need to develop upon them. And, especially for the youngsters who are sitting here and all my dear friends, I just want to conclude with a 3D formula for success in our lives. We don't know when we are going to meet next, but definitely we will meet. If not in this world, in the hereafter. I have come all the way from India, and I can surely tell you, I am not the one I was in the morning. I have learned a lot and I have gained a lot. And the positive energy that all of you were able to give to me, that I received from each and every one of you. And I will really definitely cherish them. So we don't know when we are going to meet. Definitely in the hereafter we will definitely meet. Anyway, my wish and prayer is that next time when we meet, it should be each and every one of us should be in a better position. As Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the 2 days should not be alike for a mu'min, for a believer. It should be better than the previous one. So let's strive to be better, and let's better our lives. And for this, I just want to give you a 3D formula. 3 dimensions, it's not 3 dimension, 3 words starting with D. The first D is dream, second D is dare, the third D is dedicate. You should have a dream in your life, and that dream should be as big as possible, and you should be bold enough to bring your dream into your mind, the mental picture. And there is a saying, if an egg is broken from inside, life begins. If an egg is broken from outside, life ends. So it should be your dream that should make you act. And the second D is dare. You must dare to act for your dream. You must dare to work for your dream. It shouldn't be like to be or not to be. Should I do it? No hesitation. See, there is a saying, you must try things which you think you cannot do. Then only you will know how well you can do it, how far you can do it. Try it. And then you will know your power, your strength, and you will realize and you will go ahead. And the third D is dedicate. So always you should be reminded of your dream and all your resources. Allah has given us a lot of resources, a lot of strength. And all these resources we need to utilize to achieve our dreams. And as all of us know, time is our best resource that Allah has given, and that is the most important resource in our life. And so we should pray for barakah in our time, in our skills, and we must utilize them in the best way possible, prioritizing. We should prioritize and work for it. And a lot of things we heard about the negative aspects of our lives in Britain, but there are many positives. And let's focus on the positives. Let's utilize the positives. And the country from where you are coming, maybe elsewhere, the other side is always green, and maybe you feel that is better than this. But it's not like that. Everywhere there are problems, everywhere there are challenges. And this worldly life is like that. It's not a path of roses. We always have our tests and turbulences. but how we keep ourselves firm with our iman, in our path, in the path towards Jannah. That is more important. So I think if I talk further, it will be doing injustice to you, and I don't want to do that. May Allah take us all these efforts that we have been doing. May Allah receive it from us as amalu salihat. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. سبحانك اللهم ربنا وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك.